Week 36. Overview. The French Revolution from the American Vantage Point. With this week, we finish off year 2. If your family has been following Tapestry of Grace from the beginning, you're halfway done. That is no small feat. Congratulations. Our main focus in this last week plan is the presidency of John Adams, which will bring us neatly to the election year of 1800. Adams was our second president. He had a hard act to follow. President George Washington was the most revered American of his time. Yet John Adams had many years of faithful service to his credit as a patriot and a diplomat, and he had made brilliant contributions to the birth of America before he became president. Adams served George Washington as the country's first vice president, and he ran for office in the nation's first contested election. Under the terms of the Constitution at that time, the person with the most votes became president, while the runner-up became vice president. That worked fine for Washington, who ran unopposed. It was a big problem for Adams. Thomas Jefferson opposed him during the presidential campaign, and when he became vice president, continued to oppose him in office. The rest of the country soon agreed that this was a bad idea, and amended the Constitution to change the way vice presidents are elected. The biggest challenge Adams faced was the ongoing situation in France. France had come to America's aid during her revolution. How could Americans sit by while Europe attacked the brand new French Republic now? Adams's own political party was split over this issue. All students will learn more about John Adams and his wife, Abigail, in their reading this week. Older students will also continue to study the ongoing upheaval in French society. About halfway through Adams' presidency, the French Revolution ended abruptly. Napoleon Bonaparte seized power to become the dictator of France. In a troubled time, after 10 years of upheaval and bloody revolution, the French people were ready for stability at almost any price. Napoleon was a victorious general with a vibrant, charismatic personality. He was therefore a popular choice for leadership. While he pretended to be a champion of the people and to share power with 2 other consuls, he was personally ambitious and worked to concentrate power in his own hands as much as he could. Events in France affected the development of America. President Washington had pursued a policy of American neutrality towards the French, and Adams sought to do the same. Washington had been hotly criticized for his position, but his personal prestige and depth of character allowed him to lead in this direction, despite strong popular disapproval. Adams had neither Washington's reputation nor his steady character, and the political parties that had begun to form during Washington's presidency were in full force as Adams took office. We'll see what Adams did about this and other problems as he worked to lead America for one term. John Adams of Massachusetts had been a leader since the beginning of the Revolution. He was one of the first to oppose the Stamp Act in 1765. He defended the British soldiers who fired on unarmed citizens in the Boston Massacre in 1770, but not because he sided with the British. On the contrary, in 1773 he cheered the Boston Tea Party as the most magnificent movement of all. When the Continental Congress wrestled over whether to adopt the Declaration of Independence in 1776, Thomas Jefferson called Adams the colossus of that debate. He served as an ambassador to France at the start of the Revolution and helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which ended that war. In between, he came home to write most of the Massachusetts Constitution. Historians who have read his personal papers call him an affectionate man, but most of his peers saw him as blunt, self-important, and impatient. Unlike George Washington, the military hero who towered over common men, Adams was short and stout. He was blessed with a gifted, witty wife. Abigail Adams helped him through the social challenges of his new position. Adams became America's first vice president, but he wasn't impressed with the post. He later called that position the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. During Washington's second term, Americans were increasingly dividing into the opposing parties that Washington warned against. One party favored a stronger central government. They were called Federalists. The other group preferred more power for the states. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison led this party, which called themselves the Democratic Republicans. When Washington refused to run for a third term, the 2 parties squared off with 2 different candidates. The Federalists nominated John Adams. The Democratic Republicans picked Thomas Jefferson. The campaign was partisan, nasty, and very, very close. Adams won the presidency by just 3 electoral votes. Thomas Jefferson took office as Adams's vice president. France, at this time, was deep into her revolution and was surrounded by enemies all around. Adams was dead set on keeping America out of war, the same way George Washington had. Problem was that war was hard to avoid. European ships were firing on American vessels that tried to trade with France. France made things more complicated by claiming a right to seize American vessels too. Alexander Hamilton, the second most influential Federalist in America, wanted America to attack France, not defend it. When Adams took office as president, he sent officials to France to try to work out some kind of peace arrangement with Talleyrand, the French foreign minister. Talleyrand appointed 3 agents to deal with the Americans. The agents told the American agents that before Talleyrand would even see them, they would have to pay him a bribe of $250,000, loan France $12 million, and apologize for America's pro-British policies. The news of this leaked out, although Americans never learned the names of these 3 agents. They were referred to as X, Y, and Z. The XYZ affair, as it became known, was a scandal up and down the United States. Americans got mad enough to declare war on France. "Millions for defense," they cried, "but not 1 cent for tribute." America geared up for war. They commissioned new warships. Though America was still officially neutral, American and French ships fought many battles in what was called the quasi-war with France. But America's commander-in-chief was still opposed to war. Adams sent more agents to France to negotiate with Talleyrand. This move kept America out of war, but it cost Adams the presidency. His own party abandoned him, and he eventually lost the election of 1800. The Federalists wanted war with France, but many other Americans supported that revolutionary republic. Democrat Republicans and revolutionary Frenchmen in America used their freedom of speech and of the press to attack the Federalists, especially Adams, his administration, and the Federalist members of Congress. Adams was shocked by this first full blast of raw American politics. It was free speech in all its fury, at a time when tempers were running hot on every side. No king on earth had ever had to put up with this kind of criticism. It would be treason, punishable by death in most countries. The Federalists had enough power in Congress to fight back. They passed 2 alien acts that gave the president power to deport any aliens at will. They passed a sedition act that made it a crime to criticize the president or Congress, but not the vice president. Thomas Jefferson, who led the opposition, was fair game. A number of reporters were arrested for what they wrote about the administration. The Alien and Sedition Acts were almost certainly the most flagrant violation of the First Amendment in American history. They did exactly what the First Amendment prohibited when it said, "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press." Nowadays, a journalist who got convicted under such an act would appeal the case to the Supreme Court if need be. In 1798, however, nobody had ever tried such a thing. The Supreme Court had never declared an act unconstitutional. Instead, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson led the states of Virginia and Kentucky to pass resolutions condemning the Alien and Sedition Acts. They argued that an unconstitutional act was not valid, and that states were under no obligation to respect it. The New England states, which favored war with France, promptly passed resolutions of their own supporting the Alien and Sedition Acts. All in all, it was a constitutional muddle. John Adams didn't have it easy. George Washington was a very hard act to follow. Somehow George rose above the political fray of the day. John Adams didn't. He got hit with American politics in all its power and its fury. 2 centuries later, Americans have gotten more or less used to a free and passionate people speaking their minds. Back then, nobody knew if the nation could survive such stuff. John Adams wasn't all that gracious under pressure, but he deserves our respect for steering the nation through his one terribly turbulent term.